and welcome to episode 16 of the Simply Great Relationships podcast. We're so glad you could join us today. I'm Meredith Silversmith, and this is Marina, and today we are talking about what to do when your family doesn't support your relationship.
That's a big one.
That's a big one, and that's a tough one. So today we're going to be covering why this happens, how it feels when your relationship doesn't get the support it needs from those closest to you, how this can impact couples and relationships, how to support one another when your families aren't on board, and how to set healthy boundaries with naysayers. So we're going to cover a lot of good stuff today, really important, and make sure you stay with us until the very end because we've got a great bonus for you and we'll tell you how to get it.
So I guess let's start with, why does this happen? Why do sometimes families have a hard time supporting a partner?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I think what I've seen a lot of is parents' expectations, right? So parents have an expectation of what type of partner they want to see for their child, what type of life they want their child to have, things like that. And if your partner doesn't necessarily fit that mold, that can trigger some issues.
Yeah, definitely. I think I've also seen, when I've done kind of deeper work with older couples who have children where they're not approving of a partner, sometimes it's a little bit of projection where the partner reminds them of somebody from their life, maybe an ex-partner of theirs or, somebody that's triggering to them, and they're projecting onto that partner. But, it's very hard to have awareness into that. And it's very hard to manage that and say, well, I'm not reacting to this person. I'm reacting to that person. Yeah. But I noticed that it can be like, well, he reminds me of this one. And that one was bad. So he's bad also.
Yeah, definitely. And I think probably one of the most common ones, which is pretty self-explanatory, but important to mention, there was some incident with the partner, right? There was some issue, some argument, some situation that went unresolved and wasn't discussed, and now there are just feelings of resentment and anger and hurt and frustration building up between the family members and this partner, and it just sort of snowballs from there.
Yeah, I mean, what I really see is sometimes when people come in and describe these incidents, I'm like, that could have been nipped in the butt real quick.
Yeah.
But what tends to happen is because they're undiscussed, because they're not brought up, like those feelings, it's like the little seeds of contempt grow into big, beautiful trees or big, ugly trees because they keep on being unresolved, and it's really triggering to people. And it sets like the whole system. A couple of times we've already talked about this concept of negative sentiment override, where the relationship overall feels negative. Like there is no buffer for negative stuff. Like any tiny thing that when you're in positive sentiment override, you'd completely brush off. In negative sentiment override, what it actually does is gets exacerbated and is felt as really big. Like that's what happens. So it's like the parents can never do anything right. If mom didn't check in and say, oh, how's your new job? That's it. She hates me. She doesn't approve of me. Or if the partner, doesn't check in with dad about how, his hip is feeling, then, oh, she's uncaring. She's not, she doesn't care about my family. She doesn't care about my health. Anything small gets so overworked because the whole system is a negative sentiment override and everything is looked at as so major.
Yep. Those are good examples. And, when we've talked about negative sentiment override in the past, we've talked about it in the context of the romantic relationship, right? Partner to partner. But the reality is that the emotional bank account and the potential for this negative skew or positive skew exists in every relationship. So don't think you're off the hook with the family and the in-laws because it applies there too. Have you seen much with enmeshed families?
Oh, of course. Of course. I think because of the demographic that we kind of work with, I feel like enmeshment is almost like a cultural phenomena of a lot of the cultures that are very present in our area. So I've definitely seen what's been your experience with the enmeshed families?
Yeah, I think that, enmeshment, just to give you a concrete definition, means basically the extended family is over involved in their child's life. And child meaning adult child, who may be 30 years old, but the parents still feel like they should have some level of control and influence and say. And if there's something that the partner suggests or feels or acts like that's contrary to what they think is best, it causes problems because it's seen as a loss of control of their son or daughter to this other person. So that's how I've seen it.
Yeah, it's letting go of their baby, and a lot of times people don't want to let go of their baby.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that a lot. I don't know about you, but I see that a lot in terms of like families that also have external relationships outside the family. So they're a family, but they may also be in business together.
Oh,
they're a family, but dad and son work at the same company, or, where there's dual relationships, I feel like there's almost like more room for enmeshment.
Sure.
And it's something to be extra aware of because I think that's a pattern I've noticed.
Yeah.
A lot.
Absolutely. When we think about what it feels like for the couple, you've got two people on different sides of this thing. So you've got the partner whose family it is, whose family is not in agreement or not supportive of their relationship, and then you've got the partner who's got the in-laws who are not supportive of their relationship. So, I mean, when I think of the one whose family it is, the feelings that can come up are feeling hurt, feeling lonely, feeling like an outcast. They're often compared to siblings, I think. I find that a lot, like, compared to siblings or siblings partners and compared to cousins, like a lot of comparison, a lot of effort put in by the extended family to make it clear how far off track they are.
Yeah, it's like, well, your sister married this guy. Why couldn't you marry a guy like that?
Yeah.
Or, well, your brother is with, this kind of partner, and look how great their relationship is. Why can't you also do that? It's almost like not embracing each child's individuality.
Yeah.
It's saying, well, we'd love a monotonous, like, uniform consistency in partners between our children.
Yeah.
Which is not realistic. But yeah, I think it's really hurtful, and I'm sure it brings up a lot of feelings of insecurity, self-doubt. I think it's really hard when the people who you love most and love you most antagonize your relationship.
You have to keep justifying and keep explaining, I know why is probably a big question. Well, why did he do this? Or why did she do that? Or everything's sort of under the microscope. So you have to constantly justify, well, because of this, or well, because of that, or we love each other. And, that's not a good dynamic to have at play with your own family. So that's tough.
And then you don't get to be in your role. You don't get to be in role of son or daughter or sister. You have to be in role of lawyer, having to be on the defensive all the time. And as we talked about plenty of times, like, being in constant defensiveness mode really sucks.
Yeah.
It takes a huge toll on you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's more negativity, right? Even when the defensiveness is warranted, it's still one of the four horsemen.
Yeah.
And it's still chipping away at that emotional bank account with your parents or your brother or your sister or whoever is getting involved. So definitely a dynamic we want to see be different What about for the other partner? What do you think it's like for the partner who is coming into this family?
Oh gosh, it's probably like just rejection, like so much rejection, disrespect, feeling not valued, feeling not important. Just like I think all of us really want to be accepted and embraced by our in-laws, and not getting that. Again, probably like self-doubt, a lot of insecurities that are triggered, that are like, why me? Like, why am I being treated like that? Even if you are taking accountability, it's like, well, why am I not accepted?
Yeah, and those are really tough. And it can be even harder when the family is vocal about their disapproval. Because I think there's two, maybe it's not as black and white as there being two kinds of families in these situations.
Probably a spectrum.
Definitely, yeah, a spectrum. But there's certainly your families who are going to say it, you know, make comments right to the partner, versus families where things happen more behind the scenes. But both are difficult.
I think both are really hard to manage, and it's almost like there isn't a better one. When it's really overt, it's hard because like you're being attacked. Obviously, you're probably going to go in preemptively defensive, saying like, well, I did this.
Yeah.
You know, if it's behind the scenes, you're going in not knowing how to act, and you're probably so like over stressed out about your own behavior because you know you're being scanned and judged at all times. That makes functioning at Sunday dinner pretty hard.
Absolutely. So, I mean, that's the impact on individuals, right? Those really tough feelings come up, but what about for the couple? How does this play out in terms of the relationship?
Well, I mean, these feelings, when they live within us, obviously come out in our relationships. It's really hard to feel a sense of rejection and judgment and, you know, not being accepted by our in-laws, or not having our partner be accepted, and have that like live within us and not in our relationships. So I think it creates a lot of room for conflict over our extended families, and over extended family rituals, and over traditions, and how we celebrate holidays, how we celebrate birthdays, you know, like all of this stuff, like even watching the kids and things like that, like things that should be like pleasant and exciting to talk about become issues. And also like it's such, I think there's a huge sense of walking on eggshells, because it's like, well, I want to be able to get my piece out, but a part of my piece is insulting your nearest and dearest. So think a lot of conflict.
A lot of conflict. I think, you know, what happens is it makes sense that there's conflict around, well, where are we going to spend this holiday, or how are we going to celebrate my birthday, or something that I see come up a lot is when kids are involved and it's like Mother's Day or Father's Day, and it becomes, you know, everybody's got a mother. So my mother-in-law wants to celebrate, but I'm a mother too. Don't I matter? You know, I've seen that fight play out with couples.
Don't I matter? Don't
I matter? Aren't I important? I don't want to spend Mother's Day with your mother who hates me, right? Like this sort of dynamics. You can see how that could play out over and over again. And especially when children are involved, when you talk about splitting time and trying to make things reasonably fair and even, that gets really, really tough when there's conflict with one of the families, or you know, one of the families who's really disapproving of the relationship. Because I have seen, even when that's the case, I haven't seen a lot of disapproval carry on to the grandchildren. It kind of stays with the partner, but then they want to have that 100% relationship with the grandchildren, which I think is really hard to navigate for some people who are being targeted.
Yeah, of course, because it's like, well, you can be like this to your grandchild. Why can't you be like this to me?
Yeah.
You know, it's like a really conflicting message you're receiving that even as an adult is really hard to get
Mm-hmm.
of, well, you can be so kind and warm and loving and affectionate, but why am I not getting that?
Yeah, absolutely. And then you think of childcare playing out.
Mm-hmm.
And, is the partner who's feeling ostracized going to feel comfortable leaving her children or his children in the care of someone who they feel hates them?
I think it really opens up the door to use children as pawns.
Yeah.
And I think in that situation, talk about an everybody loses situation.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, the core of this is there are such power struggles at play here, and cute little grandbabies are really, really high stakes,
Yeah.
So I think if it gets to that point, nobody wins. Nobody feels good in that system.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some things you've started or you've heard from families in the past from couples who are facing this problem?
Just that, it sucks, right? Like, that it sucks, it's hurtful, it's lonely, it's and it's impactful.
Mm-hmm.
And that, it's almost like I call it Gumby arms, the partner whose family it is feels pulled in one direction by their parents and one direction by their partner, and they can't really be present in either one.
Yeah. That's very hard. And I know I've heard a lot in my office, I feel like I'm giving up my family for you.
Mm-hmm.
Even no matter how invested they were in the relationship or are in the relationship, there comes this breaking point where they feel forced to choose.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And then for the partner on the receiving end of the negativity, they could feel like your family hates me for no reason.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes nothing happened, right? Sometimes all you
Mm-hmm.
did was sort of step into a family where the dynamic was not one that could accept you in. And that's really challenging as well. And I think this stressor being there and being so present, especially around the holiday times, it just leads to more arguments and sort of fuels arguments that are unrelated.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I think all of that is, again, it trickles down into the couple's dynamics. So what's the best way for couples to support each other when families aren't on board?
Yeah. I mean, communication, we always talk about communication. And communication is extremely important because as much as we might think we know what it feels like, it's really important to keep each other up to date on where you're at with it, because your feelings may change. Your feelings may sort of lessen, or you may go into a more neutral space for a while, and then something might happen that triggers it and you feel more negative. So it's really important to keep up to date with your partner by sharing how you're feeling. The partner who's being targeted, sharing how you're feeling without attacking the family.
Yeah, I think that's the real key, is focusing on your own feelings, not on a running list of the transgressions the family has made against you.
Right. And there's this funny quote. It's not really a quote, but just this way of saying things when there's this conflict that my friend and I always say, and it's just like, your mother. When you hear that, when they come in, it's like, your mother did this, and your mother did that, and your mother's just got all this contempt in there. So you don't want to speak like that. Again, that's you. You're using you statements. We want you to use I statements. I'm feeling really hurt. I'm feeling really misunderstood. I'm feeling really alone in this because when I heard your mom say X, I felt this way, right? So the same way you would do it with your partner, you're doing it talking about this situation. And if you haven't downloaded the communication tip sheet from episode 1, definitely go back and get that because you need that if this is going on.
Yeah, and I think it's only natural for people to want to defend their parents. So if you're starting with the, your mom did, obviously that's going to bring defenses right up, and your conversation's not going to go where you need it to go.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big one. The next one, I think, for really managing the situation well, is having empathy for your partner. And like, of course, you should always have empathy for your partner. But like in this situation, if your partner is the one that's not being accepted, having empathy that's a hard situation for them to be in.
Yeah.
If your partner is the one with the family that's not accepting you, having empathy for the fact that that's a hard situation for them to be in. That like nobody in this system is in an easy place.
Yeah.
So really, really buying into that idea that like it sucks for you, but it sucks for everyone else also.
Yeah.
So almost like letting go of this like victim mentality, like I'm the victim and they're the bad guys.
Yeah.
It's like, no, we're all kind of holding on to our own hurt and suffering. Like even the in-laws or parents are suffering in their own way. And again, maybe not using the best language to express it, but nobody is generally happy in this situation. So cultivating that empathy can really, really take things down emotionally and make them a lot more manageable.
Definitely. And trying to use that, I mean, and this is a tall order, but trying not to take it personally for either partner, right? Coming from a place, I think talking through this today and listening to this episode, trying to take the situation you may be in and put it in context, right? So if you know this is stemming from your in-laws' divorce, or you know this is stemming from their enmeshment, or I talk a lot about like, this is my stuff and this is your stuff, or this is their stuff. So everybody's got their stuff. This is probably one of those situations where it is your in-laws' stuff that's getting in the way. So that really doesn't have much to do with you. It affects you very much, but it's not a personal thing. So trying to keep that context in your mind and not take it personally and try to say, okay, I know where this is coming from. This is coming from their history or their expectations, can help reduce some of the emotionality.
Yeah, and I mean, I call that being the Buddha meditating on top of the mountain, because it's really hard, but I think once you're able to set that boundary, like, you will never have control over how your in-laws or your parents feel about you or your partner, but you do have control, even though it may not feel like it at times. This is why you kind of have to level up to Buddha level. You do have control about, like, your level of emotional reactivity to it, and really understanding that there's my stuff and their stuff and my partner's stuff, like, helps tap into that locus of control of, like, this is not my stuff to react to. This is my stuff to kind of, like, put on the boat and sail it out of my peripheral vision. Again, like, yes, this is something that is 100% easier said than done, but I always think of it as a practice. It's like working out a muscle. The first time you do it, it's going to be so hard, and you're going to have all kinds of feelings come up after it, but, like, the more you practice it, the better you'll get at it.
Definitely. So, I mean, talking about boundaries and setting healthy boundaries are a really good way to handle this type of situation. What would you suggest for that? What are your thoughts on healthy boundaries?
So, I think we all need healthy boundaries to protect our relationships. Like, I think the first thing about setting healthy boundaries, the biggest key about it is to be on the same page with your partner.
Yeah.
Not to be on the same page with your family, not to be on the same page with your in-law, like, to be on the same page with your partner. You and your partner are the unit. So for me, that's the biggest starting point, and the question is, how do we protect us?
Yeah.
Like, what is best for us? How do we minimize the impact on us? some people who are listening may think of like, oh, well, that's a little selfish. That's a little entitled. But really, like, being self-loving and self-preserving as a couple is saying, I want to invest in my relationship and I want to minimize the damage that's coming into it.
Yeah, because the reality is, this is, assuming you're in a long-term committed relationship, or you're married, or where your relationship isn't going anywhere, right? If the goal is to preserve your relationship and the goal is to stay married or stay together in as much
Happily.
peace as possible, right? This is how you do it. So whether you like it or not, this is the way. So something to think about. And I think what's really great is our bonus today touches on just these things. So we'll talk more about it later, but it's going to walk you through this process. So that's really exciting. You got to put your relationship first, right? It's got to come before your family's needs. And that's not to say that you don't care about their feelings or you don't care about their opinion, but when you're investing to build your life with somebody else, that's got to take top spot. And then from there, you sort of navigate the rest of the world.
And I'll add a little caveat here, because I think there are times when your family's gonna come first. Sure, like if somebody's not doing well, if there's a crisis, sure, but you need to think about like times when your family comes first are the exceptions, and times when your relationship comes first are the standard. It's when that's flipped that we see a lot of the issues.
Yeah, and I think it's also, this calls to both partners to put each other's families, to be mindful of when each other's families have to come first.
Yeah.
So the hope would be, if somebody were sick in the extended family, that the partner whose family it is and the other partner would both feel that this is a priority right now.
Yeah. And also, putting your relationship first does not mean rejecting your family.
No.
There's enough love in your heart for...
Yeah.
I think that's where people... Sometimes when I say this to couples in session, and I've said this a lot of times to couples in session, like, to put the relationship first, like, it doesn't mean being rejecting of everybody else. It doesn't mean never seeing anybody else or saying no. It just means that there's a hierarchy, and your relationship's first. Your family's close second. It's not like your relationship's here and your family is like way, way down there. It's just having that mindset.
Definitely. And, it's so hard to explain sometimes, but we're not even necessarily talking about so much day to day, because sometimes when I talk about this with couples, we think about like division of time. How much time are you spending with your partner versus your family? And it's not really that. It's more values, ethics, beliefs. When you're making decisions, like, the priority needs to go and like the weight needs to go to your relationship. But that doesn't mean that you as an individual shouldn't jump on the phone with your mom or dad when you're driving home from work 2-3 times a week, or have coffee with one of your parents. It doesn't mean the absence of that. It means like the bigger picture values and decision making need to weigh heavily in your relationships as a priority.
On a really practical level, though, in terms of like how to set really healthy boundaries, I think it's always important to figure out what is essential and what's just like a nice to have, would be nice.
Yeah.
Because I think this is where this is where the day-to-day stuff really can cause a lot of conflict. Because couples have different definitions. Don't get on the same page with this.
Yeah.
And something that your partner thinks is a would be nice is a have to in your eyes, and and then it's like, well, you're prioritizing them over me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I think I should give an example because I don't know if people know what I'm talking about here, but something like, if we're talking about rituals of connection within the family, larger family context, let's look at something like having a weekend meal versus Thanksgiving. So a meal every single weekend, that's 52 days you're committed to a year to have a meal with your extended family. Like, do you really need to commit 52 times?
Probably not.
Like, that would be it would be nice if, but maybe not an absolute essential. As opposed to like something like Thanksgiving, when everybody's together and it's really important and there's a lot of traditions and stuff around it, like that might be a have to. You know, so it's like really getting on the same page in terms of like what are our have tos and what are our would be nice ifs.
Yeah.
So even if you don't make 52 weekend meals a year, if you make 20, that's good enough.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I think that's a really good practical suggestion. And you know, when you're in those situations, you don't have to shoot for best friends, right? You don't have to shoot for, you know, mother-in-law, daughter-in-law, or son-in-law relationship of the year. Go for cordial and respectful. You know, be nice enough, be respectful enough, be friendly enough. You know, you don't have to be the best of the best of the best.
Yeah, like nobody said you have to be best friends, and you know, like the reality is not all of us win the in-laws lottery. That's just life. But I think if you start with, I just need to be cordial and respectful, not like integrated like another child in the family. I think that does plenty. And I think a part of that like is also having empathy and putting yourself in the shoes of the family, like, or again, like we talked about, like having empathy for everybody in the situation, because the situation is hard for everybody. So really pushing yourself to have empathy is a boundary, right? Like it's a personal boundary, because saying like, no, I want to be stuck in this position, it's like righteous indignation where I'm right and I'm the victim and everybody else is out to hurt me. Like, that's not a boundary that's probably worked for anybody.
Yeah, definitely not. And, you know, this is a tough one, but we have to say it. If something happened at some point, right, if this conflict or this dynamic is stemming from an incident, it would make sense to apologize and take ownership of your slice of what went wrong. And that's not to say that you're going to own 100% of the problem or you're going to take all the blame, but to say, you know what, I know that 3 years ago when we didn't come to Christmas, that really was hurtful, and I've learned a lot since then, and, you know, I feel badly and I'm sorry. I think that can go a long way, waving the white flag. And, you know, just to point back to an episode where we go into a lot more depth on this, number 5, how to win a fight. Not number 5. Is it 5?
I think so.
I think it is. How to win a fight. That's a really, really good episode where we go in depth how to work through this kind of process, and you could totally apply the skills to this situation.
Yeah. And the reality is, like, even if you apologize, this may be a perpetual issue with no resolution. And most likely it is. I'd say like 9 out of 10 times this is pretty perpetual.
Yeah.
So to focus on acceptance that this is the situation and making the best of it. Like we talked about in a previous episode that like perpetual issues, the real solution to them is improving quality of life. So priming yourself to be less emotionally reactive to the situation.
Mm-hmm.
Not putting this expectation that tomorrow you'll wake up and you'll have this wonderful family and everything will be great and changed and better and everybody's gonna,
Mm-hmm.
sing Kumbaya in the park. Like, just kind of having a reality check with yourself that this is a perpetual issue. And again, this goes back to like going for cordial and respectful. That might be the best you can get, but that doesn't mean that that's not good enough.
Yeah. And you know what gets in the way of reducing emotional reactivity is shoulds.
Mm-hmm.
These beliefs about what should be. It should be like this. It should be like that. She shouldn't dislike me. All these beliefs are not serving you. So if that's what you find you keep coming up against, that you can't reduce the emotionality because of all the shoulds that are running through your mind, you've got some individual work to do to release that and to shift how you're thinking about it, because you're just going to be stuck in that place otherwise.
100%. You kind of need to accept people for what they're able to give you and saying, well, my mother-in-law should be my best friend and we should be texting each other every day and we should have this wonderful relation. That may not be in your or your mother-in-law's capabilities.
Yeah, and that's okay.
And the shoulds of that are getting in the way of you having a totally cordial and respectful relationship. That's good enough.
Yep. Good enough is good enough.
Yes.
I'm a big believer in that.
Huge believer in the good enough is good enough.
So, look, as always, we don't want you just to listen. We want you to listen and integrate this into your relationship, especially if it's something you're struggling with. So, we have put together our boundary setting with naysayers worksheet for you. If you are facing this problem, definitely download it. You can get it at simplygreatrelationships.com/016 and work your way through that with your partner and see how that alleviates some of the stress from the situation.
Let's talk about takeaways.
Yeah.
What would you say your big takeaway from today is?
Even though I know it already, it's just, again, a refresher of don't expect that things are going to change. Don't come from a place necessarily of, well, if I do this, it's going to get better, or if I do that, it's going to get better. And that's not to say be hopeless, but it's to say work more towards acceptance and making the best of the situation and doing the small things you can do as an individual to contribute positively, but don't keep expecting radical change. I think that's a big takeaway. What about for you?
For me, it's a refresher, but that your relationship has to come first in this. That, like, you need to look at your unit as being at the top of the hierarchy, and you always need to ask, like, what's the best for my unit, not my extended unit that involves everybody, because that's gonna lead to a lot of sabotage. But just knowing that is the priority and setting up boundaries and kind of rules of engagement accordingly to prioritizing your relationship.
Yeah. Very important.
All right, so that's all for today. We hope that you take these tips and start using them right away. I know a lot of people can relate to today's episode. We'd love for you to continue the conversation with us in our Facebook group, where we'll hook you up with tips, with tricks, with exclusive live streams. And if you have questions for us, we'd be happy to discuss any questions you have, or if you can share experiences, we'd absolutely love to hear what your experience with this has been, and if you're integrating any of the tips, how that's working out for you. You can find our group at facebook.com/simplygreatrelationships. relationship / groups / simply great relationships.
Don't forget the /groups.
Yes, /groups. Or click the link on our website, which is simplygreatrelationships.com.
All right. That was a long one. That was a doozy of an episode. I hope you guys had a lot of takeaways. So until next week, we'll see you then.
Bye.
Bye.